The calendar marked August 14th, 1944. High above the shadowed expanse of Normandy, Hauptmann Stalter of the Luftwaffe's Kaschwada 40 Squadron was concluding another nocturnal bombardment sortie. His 77-engine, the Grarieffe, was a colossal four-engined Leviathan, representing one of Germany's most cutting-edge bomber designs. Stalter had ample justification for feeling assured in the obscurity of night. The darkness had always favored the pursuer, not the pursued. Yet tonight, a palpable shift had occurred. Tonight, something was relentlessly pursuing him through the velvety black firmament. The radar operator aboard the American P-61, dubbed the Impatient Widow, had been meticulously tracking the German bomber for 15 minutes. In the impenetrable darkness below, 3 miles beneath, French civilians slumbered uneasily in their domiciles, while overhead, a revolutionary advancement in aviation was unfolding. For the inaugural instance in the annals of flight, an airframe conceived from its very inception to dominate the nocturnal realm was poised to demonstrate its lethal efficacy. When Stalter first discerned the peculiar silhouette of the twin-boomed anomaly emerging from the gloom, witnesses later recounted that he radioed his fellow aviators with an utterance bordering on mirth. The ungainly American craft appeared less like a formidable adversary, and more like a speculative airborne experiment. That mirth, however, would prove ephemeral. To comprehend the genesis of this moment, we must retrograde to the conflagrated nights of 1940 London. The Blitz had commenced, and German bomber formations were reducing British metropolises to infernos under the veil of darkness. The Royal Air Force's initial successes against daytime German incursions compelled the Luftwaffe to transition to night operations, a maneuver for which the Royal Air Force found itself ill-equipped to counter. The dilemma was straightforward yet seemingly insurmountable. By the time Royal Air Force Spitfires could be scrambled, ascend to altitude, and subsequently attempt to intercept these raids, the bomber crews had typically discharged their ordnance and commenced their return journey. The imperative was for an aircraft capable of prolonged aerial patrols throughout the night, of detecting enemy aircraft amidst absolute darkness, and of delivering decisive firepower when the opportune moment arose. Across the Atlantic, American military observers diligently documented these developments. They recognized that, should the United States be drawn into this global conflagration, they too would need to master the art of nocturnal aerial combat. In December of 1940, the United States Army Air Forces promulgated a requirement that would irrevocably alter the landscape of aerial warfare. They sought a dedicated night fighter. The specifications were exceedingly ambitious, bordering on the unattainable. An aircraft was required to patrol the English skies for periods extending up to 7 hours during the night, subsequently navigating via radar vectors to engage German aircraft before they reached their intended targets. It needed to incorporate advanced radar apparatus, substantial defensive armament, and a crew trained for operation within complete darkness. The majority of aviation specialists deemed such a construct a mere fantasy. However, Jack Northrop harbored a different conviction. Within the Californian workshops of the Northrop Corporation, an extraordinary aerial machine was taking form. The P-61 Black Widow was the first American aircraft meticulously designed from its inception to locate and annihilate other aircraft during the night and under adverse weather conditions. Jack Northrop's cadre was forging something unprecedented in the world. The design was radical, presenting an almost alien visage. Twin engines were housed in nacelles that seamlessly transitioned into dual tail booms, interconnected by a central wing and horizontal stabilizer. The cockpit enclosure was bulbous, accommodating not only a pilot but also a specialized radar operator and, on occasion, a gunner. Spanning nearly 50 feet in length with a 66-foot wingspan, its dimensions were more akin to a medium bomber than a conventional fighter. Named in honor of the North American arachnid Latrodectus mactans, the Black Widow was conceived to embody lethal elegance. Yet, it was the invisible technology concealed within its nose that would render it truly revolutionary. The SCR-72, Zero Airborne Interception Radar, represented a triumph of wartime engineering. This radar system, weighing over 400 pounds, possessed the capability to detect other aircraft from approximately 3 miles to as far as 20 miles distant. For the very first time in history, a fighter aircraft could effectively perceive its surroundings in the dark, tracking enemy machines through cloud cover, fog, and the deepest night. The maiden test flight occurred on the 26th of May, 1942, when test pilot Vance Breeze guided the prototype aloft in the Californian sky. Despite its considerable dimensions, the Black Widow exhibited remarkable handling characteristics, performing like a true fighter. The only prohibited aerial maneuvers were outside loops, sustained inverted flight, and intentional spins. For a machine of its bomber-like size, its agility was truly astonishing. However, it was the aircraft's offensive capabilities that truly solidified its Black Widow moniker. It was a wholly metallic, twin-engine, twin-boom design, equipped with 4 forward-firing 20mm Hispano M2 autocannons situated in the lower fuselage, and 4 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns mounted in a dorsal gun turret. When all armaments were discharged simultaneously, the Black Widow could unleash a more concentrated barrage of firepower than nearly any other fighter in existence. Nevertheless, challenges soon surfaced. The 4-gun top turret was identical to the type fitted to the forward upper position of the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, and that bomber held production precedence over the P-61. Consequently, several hundred P-61s were delivered without this turret. More concerningly, those equipped with the turret experienced severe buffeting when it rotated, a problem that would require months to rectify. As 1943 progressed and the initial production aircraft rolled off the assembly lines, the Black Widow confronted its most formidable critics. These critics emanated not from the enemy, but from within the American military establishment. Certain generals questioned the feasibility of such a large, intricate aircraft effectively functioning as a fighter. Others expressed apprehension regarding its speed, which, at 366 miles per hour, was respectable, but not exceptional. The situation deteriorated in May of 1944, when squadrons learned that several United States Army Air Forces generals, including General Hoyt Vandenberg, believed the P-61 lacked the requisite capability to successfully engage German fighters and bombers, deeming it too slow. These criticisms were stinging, particularly as the aircraft had yet to prove its mettle in combat. The British Royal Air Force, initially expressing interest in the Black Widow, conducted their own assessment and arrived at a disappointing conclusion. This aircraft was subsequently returned in February of 1945, as the RAF was not particularly impressed with its performance and found its maximum operational range to be far too limited. They favored their own de Havilland Mosquito, which had already demonstrated its effectiveness in nocturnal combat over Europe. Tensions culminated in July of 1944, when General Albert Boyd ordered a competitive demonstration to be conducted between a P-61, specifically one from the 422nd Squadron, which had been meticulously tuned for maximum performance for the competition, and a Mosquito NF-17. The stakes were immense. The future of American night combat operations hung precariously in the balance. Colonel Winston Kratz, director of night fighter training within the United States Army Air Forces, had previously orchestrated a similar competition and had placed a $500 wager in favor of the Mosquito. He was unequivocally confident that the British aircraft would emerge victorious. The outcome astonished everyone. According to the account, after mechanics from the 42nd Night Fighter Squadron fine-tuned the P-61 for its peak performance, the souped-up Black Widow proved faster at all altitudes, outmaneuvered the Mosquito at every altitude by a significant margin, and vastly surpassed the Mosquito in its rate of climb. The American crews had pushed their aircraft to its absolute limits, and the Black Widow had responded magnificently. Nevertheless, questions persisted regarding the fairness of this test. There always seemed to be an insufficient number of Mosquitoes available to undertake the numerous missions the Royal Air Force assigned to the aircraft, and it is conceivable that the British deliberately lost the competition to retain more Mosquitoes for their own operational needs. By the summer of 1944, the moment of truth had arrived. The 422nd Squadron was the inaugural night fighter squadron to be assigned to the 9th Air Force in England, and they were poised to pen the initial chapter in the Black Widow's combat history. In England, the 420th NFS ultimately received their initial P-61s in late June and commenced operational missions over England by mid-July. These preliminary missions were not directed against manned enemy aircraft, but against a new German terror weapon that was causing widespread devastation in London, the V-1 flying bomb. The 422nd NFS conducted its first combat mission on July 6, 1944. This engagement was not against piloted enemy airplanes, but against unmanned V-1 buzz bombs. These rudimentary cruise missiles were swift, traveling at 350 miles per hour, and necessitated precise interception techniques. The initial P-61 engagement in the European theater occurred on July 15th, when a P-61 piloted by Lieutenant Hermann Ernst was vectored to intercept a V-1 Doodlebug. The mission nearly culminated in catastrophe. Diving from above and behind to match the V-1's 350 miles per hour velocity, the P-61's plastic rear cone imploded under the immense pressure, forcing the abort of the attack. However, the Americans learned rapidly. On July 16th, Lieutenant Ernst was again directed to engage a V-1, and this time he was successful, thereby achieving the 422nd NFS and the European theater's inaugural P-61 victory. Black Widow crews subsequently downed 8 additional buzz bombs before the war's conclusion. Concurrently, in the Pacific Theater, another narrative was unfolding. Members of the 6th NFS secured the first aerial victory against an enemy aircraft by any P-61 pilot when pilot 2nd Lieutenant Dale Faberman and radar operator Raymond P. Mooney downed a Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bomber on the night of June 30th, 1944, over Saipan. They were operating a Black Widow, affectionately nicknamed Moon Happy. The psychological repercussion was immediate. Japanese bomber crews, accustomed to operating with impunity under the cloak of night, suddenly found themselves relentlessly hunted by an unseen predator. Soon thereafter, Black Widows asserted dominion over the nocturnal skies. In early August of 1944, the 422nd NFS relocated to Mortagne, France, and began encountering German aircraft for the first time. The airfield near Cherbourg placed them within striking range of German bombers attempting to harass Allied forces advancing inland from the Normandy beaches. The Black Widow crews were entering a perilous game of cat and mouse. German pilots, seasoned veterans of years of nocturnal operations, initially regarded the peculiar American aircraft with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. The twin-boom configuration was unlike anything they had previously encountered, and many surmised it to be some form of experimental reconnaissance craft. They were tragically mistaken. The initial encounters were tentative, almost exploratory. German bomber crews reported peculiar radar contacts that seemed to materialize and vanish like specters in the night. Ground controllers dismissed these reports as equipment malfunctions or pilot fatigue, but experienced Luftwaffe aviators recognized that something was distinctly different about these enigmatic contacts. From September through November, ground-controlled intercept directed the 422nd P-61s into a total of 461 pursuits, resulting in 282 airborne radar contacts, 174 sightings, 20 of which were positively identified as enemy aircraft, and only 7 were successfully shot down. These statistics narrate a story of a learning curve, encompassing both the American crews mastering their revolutionary technology and the German pilots struggling to comprehend the entity that was hunting them. The Black Widow's radar bestowed upon it an almost supernatural capacity to track targets in conditions where human vision proved utterly inadequate. On moonless nights amidst dense cloud cover, during storms that grounded conventional fighters, the P-61 could still locate its quarry. German bomber crews began reporting encounters with aircraft that seemed to materialize from nothingness, as if the darkness itself had become animate. The aircraft's visual presentation served as a psychological weapon, as potent as its radar. 3 distinct paint schemes were evaluated: olive drab with a flat black underside, an all-flat black finish, and a gloss black application. During searchlight illuminations, aircraft painted olive drab and flat black were easily detected when passing through the beams. However, when the gloss black aircraft traversed the beams, it became virtually imperceptible. The definitive paint scheme proved to be a revelation. The gloss black finish not only aided in camouflage, but also imparted an almost otherworldly appearance. Henceforth, P-61s were painted gloss black, which subsequently became the Black Widow's distinctive hallmark. Ground crews and pilots alike began to speak of their aircraft with an almost superstitious veneration. The mystique was deliberate and highly effective. One could readily envision this enigmatic nocturnal predator lurking in the abysses of night, claiming its victims without them ever comprehending the source of their demise. It was a venomous dark lady. The mere sight of a Black Widow, gleaming like wet obsidian under the moonlight, was sufficient to unnerve seasoned combat pilots. German intelligence officers grappled with understanding this novel threat. Initial reports described aircraft of improbable size for a fighter, featuring peculiar twin-boom configurations and seemingly miraculous abilities to appear and vanish in the darkness. Some dismissed these accounts as the fabrications of terrified bomber crews. Others, however, began to apprehend that the Americans had achieved something truly revolutionary. As autumn descended upon war-torn Europe, the dynamics of nocturnal aerial warfare underwent a transformation. While the Luftwaffe's nocturnal activity diminished during this period, their tactical approaches had largely improved. Their typical post-hours incursions evolved from lone medium bombers to flights of bomb-laden FW-19s-2s. The Germans were adapting, but so too were the Americans. The P-61 crews were discovering that their aircraft was far more than a mere night fighter. It was a versatile predator, capable of assuming multiple roles. Since 1942, crews flying Mosquitoes and other aircraft had diligently addressed the Allied need for night fighters. Therefore, when the 425th NFS arrived in France on August 18, 1944, war planners assigned the unit the task of attacking ground targets. Combat operations commenced shortly after D-Day on June 6th, and the Black Widows rapidly deviated from their initial role as defensive interceptors to become aggressors. They penetrated deep into German-held territory, bombing and strafing trains and road traffic, thereby impeding enemy movement both by day and by night. The psychological warfare waged was as significant as the physical destruction inflicted. German soldiers and civilians began reporting sightings of peculiar black aircraft prowling the nocturnal skies. Unlike the familiar drone of conventional bombers, the P-61's engines produced a distinctive sound that became synonymous with danger and death descending from the darkness. Supply convoys that had once moved with impunity under the cover of night now found themselves vulnerable to an adversary capable of perceiving in absolute darkness. Railroad engineers reported encountering mysterious aircraft that would materialize without warning, deliver devastating cannon fire, and then vanish back into the night before any retaliatory measures could be mounted. By December of 1944, the Black Widow had transitioned from an experimental curiosity to a legendary predator. By December of 1944, P-61s of the 422nd and 425th NFS were instrumental in repelling the German offensive known as the Battle of the Bulge. With two aircraft providing aerial cover over the town of Bastogne, even amidst the depths of one of the war's most desperate engagements, the Black Widow was present, vigilantly observing from the darkness. The aircraft's reputation grew on both sides of the front lines. American bomber crews returning from perilous missions over Germany would report being shadowed by friendly aircraft they never visually identified, only to be guided home through the darkness by the reassuring voice of a P-61 radar operator over the radio. Those German night fighter pilots, the elite of the Luftwaffe, began to speak in hushed tones about encounters with the American Schwarzer Witwe, the Black Widow. On several occasions, German fighters managed to evade their pursuers and, in claims later disproven, reported 2 victories against P-61s, with the war diarist of Stab, NJG-6, commenting that the Black Widow was inferior to the Me 110-9 and BF-110 in dogfighting. However, these were the desperate boasts of men who were progressively losing their grip on the nocturnal skies they had once commanded. The truth was becoming increasingly evident to German intelligence. The Americans had devised something entirely novel, a purpose-built nocturnal predator that was fundamentally altering the established protocols of aerial warfare. The stage was set for the encounters that would ultimately define the Black Widow's enduring legacy. German pilots who had once scoffed at the ungainly American aircraft were now on the precipice of discovering why it had earned its lethal appellation. In the impenetrable darkness above war-ravaged Europe, the true test was about to commence. We now return to that fateful night of August 14th, 1944. High above Normandy, Amon Stalter's misplaced confidence was about to be irrevocably shattered by 3 tons of American engineering and unwavering resolve. The crew of the Impatient Widow, the pilot, the radar operator, and the gunner, represented the vanguard of a new paradigm in warfare, one where technological sophistication and rigorous training held greater sway than conventional fighter pilot instincts. The engagement lasted a mere few minutes, yet its repercussions would be discussed within both American and German intelligence circles for months to come. The Impatient Widow sustained damage to its starboard engine, along with its oil lines and hydraulics, ultimately crashing north of Barlor, Normandy. This downing was witnessed by 2 other Henkels, but the damage, in terms of impact, was already inflicted. The Black Widow had unequivocally announced its presence in the European skies with devastating efficacy. What the German pilots failed to comprehend was that this encounter merely signaled the beginning. However, a P-61 subsequently shot down a Messerschmitt B F-110, and shortly thereafter, the squadron's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel O.B. Johnson, whose P-61 had already sustained damage from anti-aircraft ground fire, downed a Focke-Wulf FW-190. The Americans had drawn first blood, and the psychological tremor rippled through Luftwaffe squadrons across occupied Europe. The official report filed by German intelligence was telling in its apprehensive tone: American night fighter of unknown type encountered. Aircraft larger than expected for a single-seat fighter. Unusual twin-boom configuration. Radar-directed attacks suggest advanced interception capability. The report concluded with a recommendation that would have seemed preposterous merely months earlier. Recommend extreme caution during night operations. The P-61 crews were, in essence, authoring the manual on modern night fighting as they progressed. Each mission imparted new insights into their revolutionary aircraft and the deadly game they were playing in the nocturnal expanse above Europe. The radar operators, in particular, were cultivating skills that had never before existed in the annals of human history. Technical Sergeant Edward Kopsel, the radar operator who had contributed to securing that initial V-1 kill, later recounted the experience. You're sitting there in complete darkness, watching these green blips on your scope, trying to guide your pilot to an intercept with something you can't see, traveling at hundreds of miles an hour. It was like being a conductor in an orchestra, where a single wrong note could mean death. The process of learning was often brutal. From September through November, ground-controlled intercept directed the 422nd P-61s into a total of 461 chases, resulting in 282 airborne radar contacts, 174 sightings, 20 of which were positively identified as enemy aircraft, and only 7 were shot down. These statistics illuminate the inherent complexity of this novel form of aerial combat. Locating the enemy was merely the initial phase of the challenge. Ground-controlled intercept operators, working from mobile radar stations, would vector the Black Widows towards suspicious contacts. However, once the P-61's onboard radar acquired the target, the true artistry commenced. The radar operator had to navigate his pilot through an intricate 3-dimensional chess game, precisely positioning the aircraft for an optimal attack while simultaneously evading detection. The Germans were not passive adversaries. Experienced Luftwaffe crews rapidly learned to recognize the distinctive radar signatures of the American night fighters and developed effective evasive tactics. Some would execute violent maneuvers the instant they suspected they were being tracked. Others would dive to treetop altitude, where ground clutter could obscure their radar signature. The Black Widow's impact extended far beyond its actual tally of downed enemy aircraft. German bomber crews, who had previously operated with relative impunity during nocturnal missions, now faced constant psychological pressure. Every phantom in the celestial expanse, every peculiar engine's rumble, every anomalous radar signature transformed into a harbinger of doom. Flight Lieutenant Klaus Weber of Camp Vada, 76 later inscribed in his personal log, "The Americans have conjured something unnatural within the nocturnal heavens. We've christened it our dear Schwarze Tod, the black harbinger of death. You cannot anticipate its arrival, You cannot discern its approach. The initial indication that it has targeted you is invariably the last sensation you will ever perceive. This psychological offensive was further amplified by the striking appearance of the Black Widow. It was an aircraft of sleek predatory design, imbued with an almost ethereal mystique. One could easily envision this enigmatic guardian of the night, lurking in the deepest shadows, dispatching its unsuspecting quarry without them ever realizing the source of their demise. It was a venomous apparition of the dark. German intelligence officers compiled increasingly frantic dispatches from their bomber crews. Tales emerged of aircraft materializing and dissipating like spectral apparitions. Mysterious contacts that seemed to anticipate their every maneuver. Adversary fighters that struck with devastating accuracy, only to melt back into the darkness before any defensive actions could be initiated. The reality was that the P-61's radar endowed it with capabilities that appeared almost supernatural to aviators accustomed to engagement by sight alone. The detection range of the SCR-720A radar, integrated into the fighter's forward fuselage, extended to approximately 16 miles under favorable atmospheric conditions. In an era where aerial engagements typically occurred at ranges measured in mere hundreds of yards, the capacity to detect and track targets at 16 miles represented a profound advancement in tactical prowess. As the year 1944 drew to a close, the encounters between the Black Widows and German aircraft escalated in both frequency and lethality. The P-61 crews were steadily accumulating proficiency and experience, while German nocturnal operations devolved into increasingly desperate and ill-conceived endeavors. On the night of December 17th, several Luftwaffe night fighter squadrons were deployed for extensive ground assault missions in support of the offensive spearheaded by Field Marshal von Rundstedt. These operations involved dozens of aircraft simultaneously scouring highways, railway lines, and known Allied positions for targets. This was the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's final major offensive of the war, and the Luftwaffe was committing all its available resources to the effort. The P-61s were poised to confront them. By December of 1944, P-61s belonging to the 422nd and 425th Night Fighter Squadrons were actively contributing to the repulsion of the German offensive known as the Battle of the Bulge, maintaining aerial patrols over the town of Bastonia. These black predators silently patrolled the frigid winter skies above the Ardennes, their radar systems continuously scanning for inbound adversaries. The engagements during this period were among the most intense of the conflict. German pilots supporting ground forces were compelled to operate at lower altitudes and in predictable flight paths. The P-61s, positioned along anticipated ingress routes, lay in wait like arachnids ensnared in their silken webs. For the P-61 squadrons of the 422nd and 425th, these nocturnal combatants presented a significantly greater challenge compared to the medium bombers and transport aircraft they typically intercepted. On multiple occasions, German fighters managed to evade their pursuers. Nevertheless, the psychological toll was immense. Even when German pilots escaped, they carried the chilling knowledge of having been relentlessly hunted by an unseen adversary. Not every confrontation culminated in an American triumph. The Black Widow possessed its limitations, and seasoned German aviators learned to exploit them. In October of 1944, a P-61 from the 422nd NFS, operating from the Advanced Landing Ground, A7 Florin in Belgium, a site subsequently abandoned by the Luftwaffe during their retreat, engaged a Messerschmitt Me 163 attempting to land. The P-61 attempted an interception, but the rocket-powered aircraft was gliding at an excessive velocity. The technological arms race was in full acceleration. A week later, another P-61 sighted a Messerschmitt Me 262 jet, but again was unable to achieve an interception. On yet another occasion, a 422nd P-61 detected a Messerschmitt Me 410, Hornisse flying at treetop altitude. However, as the P-61 initiated its dive, the Hornet accelerated rapidly, and the P-61 was incapable of closing the distance. These encounters starkly revealed the Black Widow's Achilles heel, speed. Regrettably, the P-61 was not an exceptionally fast aircraft, and it transpired that this was a critical deficiency. All P-61A and B models that saw combat were equipped with supercharged yet unturbocharged Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines. Against Germany's most advanced aircraft, speed proved to be a more decisive factor than radar or firepower. The Black Widow did not possess a particularly impressive rate of climb, managing only 500 feet per minute at 20,000 feet, a performance comparable to that of a small single-engine light aircraft. Its power output rapidly diminished at higher altitudes as the superchargers reached their operational limits. German pilots flying the new generation of aircraft could simply outdistance their American hunters. However, these limitations did not diminish the Black Widow's overall impact. Contrary to popular myth, no P-61 ever engaged in combat with a German jet or any of the late-war advanced Luftwaffe aircraft. The most frequently encountered and successfully destroyed Luftwaffe aircraft types were Junkers Ju-88s, Junkers Ju-52s, Messerschmitt Bf 110s, Focke-Wulf FW-190S, Dornier Du-217S, and Heinkel He-111S. These aircraft constituted the operational backbone of German night operations, and against them, the Black Widow proved devastatingly effective. Behind every successful P-61 mission stood the crews who had mastered this revolutionary form of aerial combat. The 422nd NFS produced 3 ace pilots and 2 ace radar operators. Radar operators and gunners shared kill credits with the pilot. These individuals represented a new echelon of warrior, blending traditional piloting skills with cutting-edge technology. The radar operators, in particular, cultivated an almost legendary reputation. These specialists could interpret their glowing green screens with the prescience of ancient oracles, deciphering omens and spilled tea leaves, discerning patterns and movements imperceptible to the untrained eye. They expertly guided their pilots through intricate intercepts in absolute darkness, often while under fire from enemy gunners. Among the most lauded crews was that commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Oris B. Johnson, the commanding officer of the 422nd. Johnson's P-61, already damaged by flak, had managed to shoot down a Focke-Wulf FW-190 during a crucial early engagement over Normandy. His aircraft became renowned for its distinctive nose art, emblazoned with the words, "No love, no nothing," and Johnson himself ascended to near-legendary status among night fighter crews. Yet, the war exacted its toll on these elite units. Lieutenant Clelitis Tommy Ormsby of the 425th NFS was officially credited with 3 aerial victories. Ormsby tragically perished due to friendly fire, moments after engaging 2 Junkers Ju-87 Stukas on the night of March 24, 1945. His radar operator survived with severe injuries, his life saved only by the swift and skillful intervention of German surgeons. The irony was profoundly bitter. Ormsby and his crew had successfully engaged and downed both enemy aircraft, only to be destroyed by their own forces amidst the confusion of nocturnal combat. This incident underscored the immense peril these crews faced, not only from the enemy, but from the inherent challenges of operating in complete darkness within a sky teeming with both friendly and hostile aircraft. While the European Black Widows were relentlessly hunting German bombers over France and Belgium, their Pacific counterparts were forging their own distinct narrative in the annals of night fighting. The conflict in the Pacific presented a unique set of adversities: vast oceanic expanses, isolated air bases, and an adversary employing markedly different tactical approaches. Nevertheless, on June 30th, 1944, a Mitsubishi G4M, Betty became the first P-61 lost in the Pacific theater. Shortly thereafter, Black Widows began to assert dominance over the nocturnal skies. Japanese bomber crews, who had grown accustomed to harassing Allied installations with impunity under the cloak of darkness, suddenly found themselves prey to an unseen hunter. The psychological impact in the Pacific was even more pronounced than in Europe. Japanese military culture placed an extraordinary emphasis on honor and spiritual fortitude. Yet, there was something profoundly unsettling about being pursued by an enemy that remained invisible. Reports began to filter back to Japanese intelligence concerning phantom American night demons, capable of striking from the darkness without warning. Variants of the Mitsubishi G4M were among the most frequently intercepted targets for P-61s operating in the Pacific. In this theater, P-61 EUAL primarily engaged medium and light bombers, although they would encounter a significantly greater number of fighter aircraft as the war drew to a close. The Japanese, much like the Germans, were compelled to adapt their strategies to counter this novel threat. As 1945 commenced, the war was undeniably approaching its conclusion. However, the Black Widow's most dramatic moments were yet to unfold. On the night of August 14th to 15th, a P-61, affectionately named Lady in the Dark by her crew, encountered an intruding Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa, a peregrine falcon designated Oscar, and ultimately compelled it to ditch into the sea without firing a shot. The encounter was almost surreal. Japan had officially surrendered, yet not all Japanese pilots had received or acknowledged the news. Lady in the Dark was on patrol when her radar operator detected the intruder. What ensued was a tense game of cat and mouse in the darkness above the Pacific. Lady in the Dark never discharged her weaponry, instead pursuing the Japanese aircraft and forcing it toward the ocean. The American crew leveraged their superior technology and training to position their aircraft in such a manner that the Japanese pilot, perhaps recognizing his untenable situation, opted to ditch his aircraft rather than prolong the engagement. However, the narrative was not yet complete. Although the war was officially concluded, uncertainty lingered regarding whether all Japanese forces had received the cessation of hostilities order and ceased combat operations. The American night fighters took to the skies again the following night, and Lady in the Dark once more identified a target. It was a Nakajima Ki-44 Shoki, a demon Tojo, and the fighters engaged in wild maneuvers as each attempted to gain a tactical advantage. This final engagement would be remembered as potentially the last aerial combat of the Second World War. The P-61 crew repeatedly lost and reacquired the Ki-44, eventually losing visual contact permanently and returning to their base. The subsequent day, ground troops discovered the wreckage of the Tojo. The Black Widow had secured what might have been the war's final aerial victory. By the war's conclusion, the statistics painted an impressive picture. Black Widow crews were credited with the destruction of 127 enemy aircraft and 18 V-1 buzz bombs. However, these figures, significant as they were, failed to fully encapsulate the P-61 program's comprehensive impact. The Black Widow had fundamentally revolutionized nocturnal warfare. Prior to its introduction, darkness served as a sanctuary for bomber crews and a formidable obstacle for defenders. The P-61 inverted this paradigm, rendering night operations perilous for attackers and advantageous for defenders. The aircraft's ability to operate undetected in complete darkness granted the Allies a strategic superiority, ensuring safer nocturnal missions and a reduction in bomber attrition. The aircraft demonstrated versatility extending far beyond its original design parameters. In December of 1944, the 425th Squadron began employing 5-inch diameter HVAR, high-velocity aircraft rockets to attack trucks, trains, and structures. The P-61's quartet of 20mm cannons proved exceptionally effective in destroying numerous German locomotives and trucks. What had commenced as a dedicated night fighter had evolved into a multi-role predator. The P-61's influence transcended the boundaries of the Second World War. It laid the groundwork for subsequent night fighter development, influencing the design of the F-82 Twin Mustang, a Korean War-era night fighter, and the F-4 Phantom II, which incorporated advanced radar combat tactics. The lessons gleaned from the P-61's development directly contributed to the modern concept of the all-weather interceptor. These lessons, acquired in the crucible of P-61 operations, led in 1950 to the introduction of the radar-equipped Lockheed F-94 Starfire, a direct successor to the F-82s that had themselves replaced the P-61. Subsequently, virtually every interceptor produced globally has incorporated some degree of all-weather capability. The Black Widow pioneered technologies and tactics that would become standard within modern air forces. Airborne radar, multi-crew coordination, ground-controlled intercepts, and precision nocturnal attacks. All these concepts were refined and validated through P-61 operations. With the cessation of hostilities, the Army canceled further production. The majority of these aircraft were subsequently employed in the first comprehensive aerial photographic survey of the Pacific Islands. A select few, along with some specialized P-61 variants, remained in active service until 1950. The Black Widow's operational tenure was drawing to a close, but its legacy was only beginning to unfold. The final operational Black Widow, belonging to the 68th Fighter Squadron, 347th Fighter Group, departed from Japan in May 1950, narrowly missing the Korean War by a mere month. It marked a poignant conclusion for an aircraft that had revolutionized aerial combat, retired just as a new conflict ignited, a conflict where its unique capabilities would have been invaluable. Yet, perhaps the most fitting testament to the P-61 came from an unexpected source. Following the war, German night fighter pilots, when interviewed by Allied intelligence officers, consistently spoke of the American Black Widow with a blend of professional admiration and palpable apprehension. Oberst Ver Strube, identified as one of Germany's foremost night fighter aces, is reportedly quoted as saying, "The Americans created something we had never conceived as possible, an aircraft that commanded the night with a totality we ourselves never achieved." The chronicle of the P-61 Black Widow is, in essence, a narrative of the transformative power of innovation and the unwavering courage of the crews who piloted these exceptional machines. Within the span of mere years, American engineers conceived an aircraft that fundamentally reshaped aerial warfare, and American aircrews mastered the intricate art of nocturnal combat. The German pilots who had initially derided the ungainly, twin-boom aircraft ultimately learned a harsh lesson about underestimating American ingenuity. What appeared awkward and experimental was, in fact, a revolutionary weapon system that harmonized cutting-edge technology with devastating firepower and exceptional crew training. The Black Widow represented more than just another aircraft. It embodied the quintessential American approach to warfare during World War II. While other nations adhered to conventional tactics and existing technological frameworks, America committed substantial resources to research, development, and the systematic innovation required to translate radical concepts into tangible battlefield realities. Today, as we reflect upon the P-61's brief yet extraordinary service, its influence is evident in every contemporary fighter aircraft. The integration of radar and weapon systems, the paradigm of multi-crew coordination, and the emphasis on all-weather operational capacity. All these elements trace their lineage directly back to Jack Northrop's groundbreaking night fighter. With a tally of just 127 confirmed victories, the Northrop P-61 played a relatively minor role in the broader air combat landscape of World War II. However, its influence extended far beyond its wartime contributions. The Black Widow demonstrated that in the arena of warfare, much like in nature, it is not invariably the largest or swiftest predator that holds dominion. On occasion, it is the one possessing the ability to perceive in the deepest darkness. The nocturnal skies over Europe and the Pacific would never again belong exclusively to the aggressor. Thanks to the Black Widow and the courageous crews who navigated her, darkness itself was transformed into an ally of freedom. The peculiar aircraft that German pilots had once mocked had become the undisputed master of the night, and its legacy continues to safeguard free nations to this day. Ultimately, the P-61 Black Widow was more than a mere fighter aircraft. It was a prescient glimpse into the future of aerial warfare, a future where technological advancement and rigorous training held greater import than ingrained tradition, where innovation superseded assumption, and where the side capable of penetrating furthest into the darkness would ultimately claim mastery of the skies.